Can't do it Saturday morning. Saturday evening.
We'll figure it out. All right.
All right, welcome. Good evening.
There we go.
Thank you for joining us this evening. Whoever is there, and whoever you are. Baxter's here. Baxter
the
loves
star
me.
of the show.
He, no matter what, he loves me. He loves me. He said, just rub me, pet my belly, and I'll be good to go. That's all that matters. That's all that matters.
And Karen is here.
And Karen is here, of course. My
So
faith
Karen's
was
logged
right.
in. Baxter's here. Q&A can commence.
There you go.
All right. Give everyone a minute to get in here. So how many weeks has it been? 2 weeks.
2.
And Cindy is here.
Oh yeah, our brides, our
faithful
faithful
wives.
brides,
Next will be
our crowns.
our mothers and our grandmothers.
Exactly. I can't even get my mother-in-law on this thing anymore.
Yes. And Stacy is here.
Oh, okay, good. Stacy Sims.
Stacey
there
Sims
you go.
is here.
Hello, Stacy Sims.
So good. So Pastor Chris and I were just talking about the service this weekend, some last minute preparations, obviously getting back into the building. We were talking about whether or not we live stream the sermon, whether or not we recorded the sermon, and both work and both have technical advantages to either one. We have the ability to do both, but I say all that to say this: if you are not in the building come Sunday, you will still be able to watch the sermon either right at 9:15 if we set it up at that time, if we record it, or when we start preaching at say 9:45 or whatever, if we go live stream. And that'll all be made clear before Sunday, but whether you've been watching it on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, we'll make sure it's clear. You know where to go and how to see the message if you're not there.
We met last night as elders and to put together a plan for Sunday the 28th, moving back into the building, maintaining social distancing. And we have, I think, seating in the sanctuary, and then we also established seating in the fellowship hall in a socially distanced, safe way. And I think there's an announcement coming out in the next, hopefully by tomorrow, from the elders. But and also we made contact with Pasco County today. As you know, Pasco County put out an ordinance that masks were required in all businesses. And so we weren't sure if that includes or excludes us, and Pasco County said that excludes us as a church, that we are not mandated to wear masks. And so we're going to have masks available. We're going to leave that up to the people and their convictions on that. But I think we've got a good plan that will keep people socially distanced and do our part. We want to do our part.
Can I say something positive about masks?
Yes.
Since I wore a mask, since they've implemented this mandatory mask thing, I wore a mask out today.
Yep.
And I noticed small children no longer run from me.
Oh, good.
That's good.
That's good.
People smile at me more.
Oh, wow.
So if you look like me, this mask thing is the best thing that's ever happened to me.
You've gained friends
You know what I mean?
like never before.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll work for me too.
Yeah, maybe.
Apparently
we know what the problem's been the whole time.
Problem, exactly.
You know,
exactly.
so
it's a razor. It's a razor.
Yeah.
So we really, and are trying to do our best to balance everything that's out there. It's a very difficult. It's a strenuous, difficult time. Even trying to interpret that ordinance last night, because we want to obey the government. We want to do our part. And we want to do what they ask us to do. So we went into Sam's in Hillsborough County, and everybody had on masks, and Pasco's followed suit. Lots of counties. I think Joel was saying he was down south, and some counties down there were implementing or seeking to implement that. So it's spreading. It seems. I think there are certainly more cases popping up. They're doing more testing, more positives. So we need to do our part. Well, regardless, we need to do our part. It's the loving thing to do.
Yep.
So
in the air conditioning this Sunday.
In the air conditioning.
We start, it'll be normal 9:15, but obviously there's not childcare.
No childcare yet. And I talked to Idlewild yesterday as well, and they were trying to move into that direction. And just because of the recent spikes and all that's going on, they have punted childcare, nursery, all of that. They've punted it for the foreseeable future. Our hope as elders, I don't want to speak out of turn, but you say something and you get held to it, so forgive me. These are not edicts or written in stone. The goal would be, And I think a lot of people are waiting to see what the schools do.
Yeah.
You know, if kids go back to school and as they did prior, you know, I think the hope for us is August. We're back to whatever normal can look like moving forward. I think that would be the ideal. So many people are on vacation, June, July. We're already into July. 5 more weeks without it. We'll figure it out. And I think that's just the safe thing to do, quite honestly. I mean, you don't want to put somebody in an awkward spot to get it, take it home, spread it to more people, you know, who are going to watch the kids, care for the kids. And I know some families have graciously said they would, but you just struggle with, is it worth it right now? Is it worth it? And so, yeah, we be gracious Sunday. I would encourage you to get there a little early, because we're gonna bring people in shifts, and we're gonna sit you down in socially distanced ways, and it's not gonna be a free for all coming into the sanctuary. And so I would encourage you to get there a little early. That will help us tremendously, get people in their spaces. And I think we have a pretty cool plan together. That's a loving plan, a wise plan. I think it'll help people. People who come will feel safe and secure as much as possible. And because we do love you guys, and we want to do things in a God honoring way.
You know what I really recommend we need to do with the plan? We need to install car seats.
Car seats?
Because you want to strap them kids down.
Yeah,
My
exactly.
kids need to be strapped into the seats the whole time. You know what I mean? iPads on the back of the pews. I mean, that's in the budget, isn't it?
Well, and Corey,
Headphones and iPads?
Pastor Corey's putting together some packets for kids that we'll have to keep them occupied, so to speak.
With melatonin?
They'll be laced with melatonin.
Good. Good.
So we're making some changes and adjustments there, and it's hard. I mean, I think that
if you hear a kid being
it's
loud,
an awkward time to do church. You want, and people are feeling the effects of being separated, isolated. We're just not made for this. We're wired for community. God made us to be with community and people, and especially the believers. And I've really been meditating. You see I rewrote a devotion, not this morning, yesterday morning, about just the God who speaks, and the timelessness and eternality of His words. And you think about Hebrews 4, not forsaking the assembly together. I think we're all feeling that right now. The effects we have, what we're used to has not been there, and you're feeling it. I'm feeling it. I long to regularly see and you can email and text and all these things. It's not the same as sitting with your friends and family, hearing the word spoken. And so I'm excited about the text this Sunday and the sermon, and just as we continue to look at the body of Christ and relationships amongst one another, regardless of skin colors and all that, and just the biblical basis for that. Hopefully these sermons have been helpful.
Is this the last sermon in that series? Do we go back to Romans in 2 weeks?
I don't know. We got to talk about it as elders. So it's possibly 2 more. I actually have been working. I have 2 sermons that I could preach on Sunday. It's just a matter of how I want to handle it. One is a little bit more of an overview, and then the other digs down deep. So I may give the overview Sunday and then dig down deep into Ephesians 2. Because, again, we've said it, the gospel is the answer. I know that the world, and I don't want to be, get in a political mess here, but the world, and you hear groups all the time, all you need is love, all you need. Well, technically they may be correct. I think history proves that it just doesn't happen. I don't think anyone's arguing over the answer. It's how you do the answer, right?
Right.
I would argue we don't love each other even in the church the way that we should.
Of course. And
that is the problem.
Right.
Even though John 13, 34 and 35, this is the new commandment I give you, that love one another. This is how the world will know that you are my disciples, that you love one another.
Exactly.
So what I'm trying to get at is, and I think what God would have us to do is the church, similarly, to Israel. Israel had the law. The law was meant to separate them from other nations, ultimately to draw those nations to the Lord. By seeing the blessing and how God provided for them and cared for them. They were to be a light for other nations.
And their devotion.
And their devotion. It was never meant to be this. It wasn't for Israel's sake. It was for the glory of God and to expand beyond the nations. See the Genesis 12 with the Abrahamic covenant. It was always meant to be other nations were to be blessed through that. Israel may have distorted it and used it wrongly in ethnic pride and all that, and looked down on the Gentiles. But for the church, you translate that to the church, we are to be distinct. And one of the ways that we ought to be distinct in the similar way is that how we love one another. If there were no race issues within the church, and there were no issues across gender lines and ethnic lines and language lines and all what the global church will look like one day, you can imagine how the world would be coming to the church saying, how is this possible? How is it possible? And the answer is the gospel. The world, the problem is, in my opinion, again, I think it's biblical, the world is trying to accomplish in the flesh what only God can do through the Spirit in us, right?
Yeah.
Just love one another. Well, if that was that easy, why do we have the Spirit?
Right.
And when the fruit of the flesh, Galatians 5, is this: envy, strife, malice, jealousy, ... The fruit of the Spirit is what? Love. Very first one. Love, joy, peace, patience. Those things, those qualities are not going to be exhibited. I was looking today, and it'll be in the sermon, but I think from 1500 BC to 850 BC, history shows there were 7,500 what they called eternal covenants formed between competing adversarial nations. None of those 7,500 covenants lasted more than 2 years. You look at the history of the world. What's the one denominator, the one thing that consistently happens? Fighting.
Yeah.
Fighting.
Yeah.
And if it were that simple, we would have solved it by now.
Well, and I think when we talked about this recently, that the devil tempts us in unique ways depending on certain situations, right? In marriage, he attempts to divide husband and wife by, say, problems of lust or a lack of love in other ways.
Right.
He may constantly try to throw that as a useful tool to disrupt.
Right.
But within the church, I think it's a subtle thing he does. He'll use gossip, slander, and division. So let me give you an example. You might be a person who at work never gossips with other coworkers, never slandered your boss, never had those issues. Then you go to church, you're driving home from church one day, and all of a sudden you're like, man, I'm not sure the pastor should have preached that way. I'm not sure I would have preached it that way. All of a sudden you're tempted to all this divisive stuff, and you think it must really be an issue because I'm not the type of person who normally deals with that.
This is righteous wisdom or whatever.
Right. But it's actually a temptation
Absolutely.
to divisiveness that the devil is using. If we're not aware of those particular devices he uses in the church,
right.
I think if we just say, nope, he just always uses the same temptations. Right. Same within marriage and in parenting and in business, there's unique things.
Right.
Then I think we fall prey to it pretty easily.
Yeah. And I think whether it's Colossians 3, do your work heartily as unto the Lord. Husbands, love your wife as the Lord, as the Lord loved us. Children, obey your parents. This is a commandment with a promise. As unto the Lord. Even in Ephesians 5, all those roles that you see in 5:22 and following, husband, wife, child, employee, employer, I think people miss the context. That's all under the realm of being controlled by the Spirit.
Right.
This is what these will look like when you're controlled by the Spirit. I think God is calling us, and what we miss is our marriages ought to be different, our parenting ought to be different, our work ethic ought to be different, our leading ought to be different. Not to our own glory, but to the glory of the Lord. The world would come to us and say, well, the world's marriages end at this rate, but your marriages hardly ever end. What's the deal? Hey, why is your work ethic so great? All of that, the answer ought to be God. Do all things to the glory of God. The end road of that conversation is, can I introduce you to my God?
Yeah.
And that's all I'm getting at is, we are to be distinct as a people to the glory of our Father. And including, race relationships, husband-wife relationships, parent-child relationships, friend relationships, whatever, students, in your studies, in your team efforts on athletics or clubs or any of those things, the world ought to take notice that there's the common denominator in that is these guys are all Christians and gals are Christians. Yeah. What is going on? Let me inquire. Even for Israel, how is this little old nation, how are their socks blessed off of them? Well, let me introduce you to my God. That, to me, when I read the Old Testament, to me, that's the point.
Yeah.
How is this little old nation surviving? How are they God? And unfortunately, you see in Israel what you see today. Israel wanted to be more like the Canaanites, fell prey to that, and they missed their chance. You know what I mean? The difference was gone. They became more like the world, and Israel lost its saltiness and light. My fear is that's us in the church. That statistically, in those categories, there's not really a substantial difference. Therefore, the world is not asking us the right questions.
Right. But it's interesting. I feel like the Lord challenges that. The church seems to be a place. I mean, God calls all types of people.
Yeah.
And so, since becoming a Christian, I've had more diverse relationships than I've ever had in my life, and I've also become more aware of tendencies to judge by appearance.
Right.
Fortunately for me, not racially.
Right.
But other appearances.
Oh yeah.
I mean, let's face it. There are people who dress like you, talk like you, act like you. You're more likely to maybe be drawn to those people, and race is obviously one of the worst versions of that. But there's other ways in which we could judge by appearance.
Absolutely. Weight, height, all kinds of stuff. I mean, clothing, all kinds of stuff.
Clothing, you know.
Eye color, hair color.
I was in a church one time.
Abound.
Yeah, I was in a church one time. I was really challenged by that. We all kind of had a lot in common, and we were very diverse for as small as it was. But we had some new converts come into the church that were vastly different from us, and that was a great opportunity to see, to kind of take away those, what might normally make people feel uncomfortable because there's a difference there and you're trying to relate. But the gospel just made that so easy when we focused on the right things. And I think that the race issue is one issue of judging by appearance. But if we're really looking deep into our heart, maybe people go, well, I don't have that issue. But where do you judge by appearance? You know, do you only like people that talk to you in a certain way?
Correct.
Do you only like people that are cool with certain things you do and not cool with other things?
We tend to gravitate to ourselves.
Right.
We tend to gravitate to sameness.
Yeah.
Because it's easy. We know what to expect. They think like us. They like what we like. They don't like what we don't like. That's easy. And that is not what we're getting at Sunday. Is unfortunately that is not representative of the gospel.
Right.
God did not reconcile himself to people who were like him. He reconciled him to people who were vastly different, opposite of him. And even, we tend to focus on the reconciliation through the gospel vertically, which indeed is the case. We have been reconciled to God, but also the gospel reconciles relationship amongst believers horizontally. And that's what Paul is getting at in Ephesians 2:11 and following. We love to read 1 through 10 because it's about us and God. But then when you get to 11 through 22, and it's reconciliation between Jew and Gentile, that God himself broke down the dividing wall, which I would argue is the Mosaic law, and that's in that case, and that's what divided them, and he made the two into one. And that's what I'm getting at. What is most representative of the gospel is exactly what you see in Revelation. All tribes, all nations, all tongues, all worshiping together the same God. I think we're clearly seeing in our culture only God can do that.
Yes.
Only the gospel can do that. There's no and I know that it's that beacon in us that Romans 1 type of stuff that God has put it in us. He's made it evident to us. We want it. We just can't accomplish it on our own strength.
No, you can't educate it. You can't legalize it.
And I certainly think we as a culture need to realize, when you really dig down into it, the effects of slavery and what it did to families and generations are definitely there. I mean, I think it would be naive to dig our head in the sand. As a country, we have grossly I would say made this bed and now we're sleeping in it. The effects are there, and that's on us. And so moving forward, and unfortunately the church again was right along with slavery, right there in the middle of it. Instead of being different, same as the world. And so again, you see throughout culture and history when the church becomes more like culture, it doesn't do culture any favors. And in our flesh and our wisdom, we think, oh, well, if the culture likes us, then we're being successful. The reality is people don't notice sameness; they notice different, and they're attracted to like what's going on over there. And the church, Christians, when we look like the world, we lose our purpose and reason for being here.
Right.
No one notices us.
Right.
And we were, you don't have an opportunity necessarily to give testimony to the greatness of God, because everybody's doing what you're doing, right? I can do that. But when God does these miraculous things, i.e., bring the Jew and the Gentile into one body, because you think from a diagram, you had the Jew here, unbelieving Jew, you had unbelieving Gentile, and what God has done is the believers are this one whole new group called believers. Call them the church, call them the spiritual Israel if you want. I don't really care. But we saw that in Romans 9. There's an ethnic Israel, there's a national Israel, and there's a true Israel, right? You see that. Not all Israel is Israel. The point being is he's taking those two.
We got our first question finally.
And so, that's the gospel.
And I believe this is the first time Lee Stewart has asked a
Oh,
question.
Lee. Okay.
Fortunately, it's a really easy question.
Oh,
It
wow.
shouldn't take you more than 30 seconds to answer.
Lee knows the word. He thinks big thoughts. He's a big C.S. Lewis guy. I thought there'd be like a stump the guys.
It might be.
It might be? Uh-oh.
It's definitely a setup.
It is a setup. Good.
So if you need a minute.
Okay. Here we go.
What impact, negative or positive, does social media play in displaying the gospel on the issue of race relations or social justice matters? I'll read that again. That's a big one. What impact, negative or positive, does social media play in displaying the gospel on the issue of race relations or social justice matters?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty outspoken about my overall disdain for how social media is used, and I think even in this time of being away, it's been used for some good, but it's also been used for some bad. I think Lee, I'll just say, Lee, you asked the question. I think the challenge is it's really easy to just spit out a bunch of truth and throw out a bunch of stuff out online and post it. The hard thing is living it, right? We can all tell you the principles. Even of, let's say, marriage, for instance. It's living in the same household with another person that's different than you. That's where it gets real. And so I think, from a social media standpoint, I personally am not sure that's where these battles need to be fought. I think they need to be fought over a cup of coffee or a soda or a glass of water like this. Going back and forth and bantering with somebody on social media, I think it can be used. I don't think it's the best way to try to go at these things, because people get mighty powerful behind the keyboard, and I just don't think that's the venue that's best. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it does.
I think that's just not the best venue. I don't think it's it's kind of, I don't think texting is a great way to solve problems. If there's an issue, call the person or meet with them. Emails, those things are not.
You love email.
They're just not. I mean, if somebody says, "Hey, Chris, we need to talk about something," let's go right now. Let's meet in person, and you can solve something in person and talk about it in person, because there's this versus just you miss inflection, you miss tone, you miss body language, you miss all those things that just aren't conveyed through typed letters. I'm not saying it's useless. I think it's far more dangerous than it is helpful.
I would go as far as to say I believe that our society has become more passive-aggressive in general
because of social media. Absolutely.
You see that in bullying and things like that.
And I think, Lee, I've talked about it. I mean, and Lee, you study God's Word. You love God's Word. I think there's a discipline and a practice and a learned thing of taking a truth in seminary and then applying it as a pastor, right? Sitting, I wrote my dissertation in for my master's degree on a theology of marriage and divorce and remarriage. Okay, I've studied.
Can I get a copy of that?
Yeah, you can have anything you want. It's about, I don't know, 40, 50 pages. I've studied those texts well. I think I'm very convicted about what they say. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm very convicted about what they say. But there's a whole nother level of being a pastor and a friend and a co-laborer when you sit alongside somebody at a table and you talk about it. Because there's ramifications. There's feelings involved. There's all these things. We were meant to be personal,
Right.
Interactive. This is what was meant to be how we would live our lives, not isolated and just writing things back and forth. I just don't believe that. I don't believe that we were meant to be communicators that way.
No,
I'm not saying you can't convey truth, but I think it has to be relational. Even from an evangelistic standpoint, there's just something different about sitting down with somebody and sharing the gospel with words and communicating a conversation than typing it out.
Well, and
I don't know if that helps.
I think
Lee
it
or
does.
not, or...
I think so. I think that we to unpack the question a little bit, to say displaying the gospel within those issues. So I would look at it as does the fact that these issues are culturally relevant, explosive issues where people are clamoring for answers, does that give greater opportunity to the share of the gospel? Absolutely.
Well, and to look at words, when Lee, to me anyway, in the question it says, can you display the gospel through social media? I'm not sure. I think you can explain or tell the gospel, but I'm not sure you can display the gospel. At least in my mind, display, I'm looking at Tom's life and I'm seeing it worked out in his life.
Right.
That is, you're loving your neighbor, you're sacrificially loving Cindy, you're raising your children, your work ethic, those things are displays, pictures. We're walking through Acts as a family, and we meet each day and talk about a chapter of Acts, and we talked yesterday about Acts 6, and today Acts 7, and Stephen. With Stephen's life, we've looked at the apostles, and the apostles are beaten, and they said, listen, you're telling us we can't speak and share about the gospel anymore? We can't do that. Their lives were a display of the gospel in a way that a written letter never would have had the impact.
Right.
And it's interesting, and it keeps saying, and their numbers increased all the more. Even in chapter 5 with Ananias and Sapphira, they dropped dead for lying to the Spirit. And it says, fear came over the congregation, and yet many were added to the numbers. That's a display of the gospel in a way that the written word never would have.
Yeah.
Stephen's life, even Paul sitting there watching him be stoned to death. I think God used that in a way that 2 chapters later on the road to Damascus, he gets saved. He's watched I think it would be to watch somebody give up their life for the gospel. And I read something the other day, not to beleaguer the point, forgive me, just say hush if but I watched, it was a Marine who was part of a group that were captured, and they were POWs. And they were tortured and beaten, and all kinds of awful things happened to them by the enemy trying to get the information that they wanted out of them. And he said his point was, having gone through that, having been trained for it, having been through it firsthand, he said, there's no way that you could get those 12 guys to not one of them break at some point and say, this is a lie, I'm not dying. Because he said, I've seen it firsthand. When you're offered your life or to tell what you're supposed to tell to get out and save your life, people human nature is you break. And he was saying, listen, as a Marine who's been there, done that, the probability that those 12 disciples would have stuck to their story amidst all their persecution and never wavered and actually were emboldened, he said it never happened naturally.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. So I think that's a display of the gospel that a written letter will never accomplish.
And I think I know where you're going with this, and Lee said he used the word display purposefully. And I think of where it says, to love not just in word but in deed.
And that's what I'm getting at.
So on social media, let's say I stand with this group, and I just want to make sure everyone knows I feel this way, and it's really important you hear my heart in this, and this is why I feel this way, and I share that. And then if I say to myself, I'm loving my neighbor because I'm making it clearly known where I stand, I would say that's loving in word.
Yeah.
Now, I don't see on social media, it is not displayed to me if you go then in love indeed.
Right,
I don't
right,
know.
Right.
I mean, I guess if you took a video, but then are we standing on street corners and proclaiming it, right? But if you love indeed, if my life, let's just say my life is filled with loving my neighbor, and I never go on social media and make a stand. There are people today who would accuse you of having a wrongful silence.
Right.
That you have to stand in this way. You have to change your profile picture and have this thing going and this thing going. Let's say that my life is one of sacrificial love, but I never, go and add my name to a roll of people that are proclaiming something on social media. I think, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, Lee, but to me, when I hear the word display, I think we are called to display.
Out. We are.
And in word, we have to be almost in a sense more cautious there. I think if we justify ourselves somehow by saying, well, I'm all upset about this, so I'm going to go do the deed of saying that on Facebook, and now suddenly I call that, I've done my part. Right. I don't believe that Christ would believe
no different than someone who just thinks they're a believer because they post a verse every day.
Right.
On there, or their business, they put a verse up there. I mean, that's not what we're called to do. And I assumed you used that word display there, Lee. I mean, I hope I'm getting at what I don't think that's a display.
Right.
I think that's let us not love with words and tongue, but with actions and in truth.
Yeah.
It's easy to just say the right things. It's hard to do them. I mean, and again, not the other day, we try to love on our neighbors, and the couple across the street are older, and he came home with a truck full of mulch and topsoil and all that in bags, and so we went over and said, hey, can we help you? I mean, to me, that's a display of love versus just saying, hey, and I think James talks about this, who says to his brother, be warm and be filled? Right. But you don't meet their need.
Right.
That doesn't even make sense, James says there. And, I think I think that's the display that's powerful, and I think that's what James is getting at. The reality is, what good is saying to somebody, hey, be warm and be filled? Well, if I could do that on my own, I wouldn't be cold and empty.
But if you have and your brother has not.
Proverbs 3.
Right.
If it's in your power to do it, do it. That's a display. And I think far too many Christians are very powerful and bold behind the keyboard and very, very, weak.
And Paul was accused of that.
Outside of that.
Paul was accused of being bold with his pen,
right.
but in person he had this weak appearance. But look at what he endured for the sake of the gospel.
I think there's too many keyboard soldiers and not enough doers. Do not be hearers of the word only, but doers.
I'll say something
James
positive.
Talks about, and again, I think I don't mean to be, it's just too tempting. It's easy. It's easy. It's easy. It's easy to do that.
And Lee said, great answer. I think he's referring to you. When I look at what has impacted my life, it's been acts of love that were far more impactful than words of love. Yes, I remember the acts far more than the words. Let me say one positive thing about evangelism on social media, though, is that I think we have to be careful, even on social media, not to hide our faith under a basket there, too.
Yeah.
I know people that are like, well, I won't put that out there because, then I won't have people that follow me or whatever. I think we should be authentic in every area of our life.
Yeah, I think you should be consistent.
If you choose to be on social media and you never mention Christ because you're ashamed, be careful. And I will say this, and I'm not boasting in myself in this, but I will say this, that when I first became a Christian, I made that very clear on social media. Probably went a little too far, a little cage stage there. But I have had people that have called me and reached out to me when they had spiritual questions because they said, I believe you to be an authentic Christian. And I know of at least one person who, because of those interactions, became a follower of Christ.
And I would say, to your point, I mean, we need to be consistent in all areas. You could be tempted to be unscrupulous in your business dealings in order to make more money to provide for your family. But you're a different way in other areas, supposedly. Right. You could be unscrupulous at school and live double life. I think there's a tendency in our sinful flesh to, seek the approval of man or seek the world's goods in a specific area. And it, in this case, it may be social media, but I think it's inconsistent. Yeah. And I think that's where all areas of our lives, seen and unseen, ought to line up.
That said, I think if social media went away in the church for 2 weeks, we'd be better for it.
We would be. Oh, you don't have.
Maybe we should all do a fast at the Church of Odessa.
I know that social media and it's has caused harm. I mean, I was honest and tried to be a little open on Sunday, maybe for better or worse, but the thing that wakes me up early and keeps me awake is just the idea that it's almost like come August, I feel like we almost have to do a reboot. Almost in some ways we're starting, not over, but it's just, I just feel like, and I don't mean it's just like 8 years of hard work has been crippled. And I don't mean it's devastated, not like it's not there, but it's just, you can't send your spouse away for 6 months to a foreign country and then come back and expect you just pick up where you left off.
I've experienced that.
Yeah, there's going to be a difference.
It's definitely different.
And so I don't mean it's like, but then you couple it with, suppose your spouse saw a couple things you wrote.
Exactly.
That were not above board. So now when you come back, it's not only the time, it's something you said or wrote or didn't say. And that's all I'm saying. The distance is one thing, but then you pile on some of the things and the opinions and people have shared about whatever online, and it's just Satan has duped us into being divisive, and it's just disunifying, and we think, well, there's 300 of us, we all came back. Yeah, but we're disunified, we're disjointed. God's not honored with that.
Maybe in God's providence, it's a grace that we've had to deal with these things now, because personally, I don't see that getting much better between now and November if we don't learn how to deal with these things.
No, I mean, yeah.
Because come October, gloves are going to be off from everybody.
Absolutely.
And if we don't know how to keep the mission of Christ in front of us and paramount, if we don't prioritize our lives, there is no doubt we're going to be polarized.
And I think the challenge for all of us is, we ought to care about government. We ought to care about race. We ought to care about orphans. We ought to care about widows. We ought to care about Hope for Justice and all those organizations. But underneath all of that, forming the foundation, is the gospel. Mm-hmm. We exist for the proclamation of the gospel. We are ambassadors of Christ, not a political party, not any of these other things. And forgive me, I'm not belittling those other things, but beneath all those other things is the gospel. And I believe the gospel informs all those areas. The problem is we can go about all those other areas and forget the gospel.
For sure.
Like we could brag that we have 800 persons coming to our food pantry every other Saturday. But if we're not sharing the gospel with them, what's the point?
Right.
We've missed the boat. Yeah. If they're not seeing the love of Christ and hearing it, we can... our Savior is not a political party. Yeah. Our Savior is God created this world. It was good. And there's an element that is still there, but it is marred by sin. Mm-hmm. And it's that tension of, Paul dealt with it. I don't want to be an escapist.
Yeah.
But I also don't want to be Eeyore either.
Right.
Whereas we can get after the gospel. You want to affect change in this world? Preach the gospel.
Amen.
And for the last generations, I would argue Christians have been shamed into silence.
Yes.
And, you're seeing the power of being able to speak.
If you share the gospel, it's going to cost you something.
Don't
go into it thinking you're not going to be affected.
And just like today, sharing your opinion today costs you something. But if it matters enough to you, you'll share it.
Right.
That's what I've noticed in my own life, let's just say. And so if it doesn't matter, you tend to you're not going to die on that hill.
Right.
You come after my wife and kids, well, I'm going to go down swinging.
Right.
You know, they matter, and you know, but I think that's it's so easy to set aside the gospel and to join forces with a political movement or these other things because we gain the approval of man, and everybody's on board, so to speak, when we forget the gospel, and it just doesn't work.
I mean, and yes, and there's
doesn't
a
work.
lot of tangents there for sure, and different things that we could be focusing on as the church. But the main thing we know that we are to do is to carry out the Great Commission. And if you're not troubled as a believer that there are parts of this world where Christ is not preached,
Correct.
and that people are dying in their sins without any hope at
None.
all, that there are people who are in this country searching for answers and are being given political opinions and not being pointed to Christ.
Right.
We are the ones who
Right.
have the solution. Don't
Correct.
you think on the day of judgment, those people will rise up against us and say,
Hey.
how did you know?
Yeah.
And missionaries were often accused of that.
Mm-hmm.
When they went and they shared the gospel, these people would get saved and said, had you been here
Yeah.
30 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
all
Correct.
these people would have been saved.
And Satan has duped us into thinking that if we just stay silent, we're doing people a favor. We're not.
Because we think that
We're
if we
not.
offend somebody,
Yeah.
we'll never be able to reach them, and so we
Yeah.
just don't reach them at all.
Yeah, and we saw it in our own church. I mean, the Daggetts, they're in Africa. You know, they came as guests of the Joneses, and they walked out totally offended and said, "Hey, that guy up there is an idiot and a jerk. I can't believe he's so arrogant, blah, blah, blah." And then 3 years later, they were atheists. 3 years later, they write me a letter and they say, "Hey, thanks for preaching." You know, so, and I don't say that about me. I just say that it was a reminder to me to preach the gospel.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what God's doing in someone's life.
Yeah.
And they may hate you today, and they may love you tomorrow. And you don't know what seeds, and that's the thing with the gospel is, I think the Bible and God so wisely compare it to farming and athletic events and all that, because you don't plant today and harvest tomorrow. Mm-hmm. You plant in this season, you reap in another season. Athletically, you practice hard here, you begin to reap it over here. Mm-hmm. So we live in that me now, just now generation, and it's just it just doesn't work that way.
You know, it's clear to me, and actually just, we went and watched the Chosen thing. We went and watched that through. And what stood out to me in that was seeing the picture of it was just how much Jesus was thrown into the middle of such similar controversies, major political controversies amongst his own ethnic people, with, especially the story of Matthew.
What, ethnic controversies with the Samaritan woman? I mean, you see what you're going through Samaria?
So he was asked, what's your opinion on economics with taxation?
Hello.
What's your opinion on roles that we should be playing? What's your opinion on associating with different people? All this same stuff. And interestingly, what's the testimony of Christ? I have come to do the will of my Father.
To seek and save the
And
lost.
as a matter of fact, from appearances of all of those people, I'm doing what I shouldn't be doing, but what am I doing? I'm loving without judgment.
Right.
I'm serving, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form making a political scene.
Right.
In a sense. Now, I'm not
And
saying
you're not
that doesn't justify.
He did not intentionally make a stink.
Right.
That was not the goal.
Right.
The goal, I'm going to heal this person. I know it's going to make a stink. And there were times where he avoided that.
But was it fair to say this? In doing that, who did he reach? He actually reached Romans.
Right.
He had centurions coming to him.
Right.
Do you think if he would have been saying, these centurions are a bunch of
the
jerks?
Pharisees themselves, you see him coming to him at night
And
saying,
you may have to correct me after the live stream, and I'll accept that. But my point is that this is what dawned on me yesterday as I was thinking through this. And I'd love to get your opinion on this, since someone else is asking questions that my wife just did, probably to save me. But Jesus never condemned Caesar.
Yeah.
He had every reason to.
Right. Didn't.
But he was able to reach centurions.
Right.
He also didn't condemn other people. Who did he go after? False teachers.
Right.
He was definitely vocal about false teachers in the church.
Well, and he to the point where, he says it's not the healthy needing the doctor but the sick, to the point where he was accused of false things because he was hanging around people that other people didn't think he should be hanging around with.
Right.
And so I think, again, I've told our kids, you go sit down next to the kid in the lunchroom that nobody else wants to sit with. The rest of the cafeteria on the surface is going to laugh at you, and yet God is applauding you.
Right.
And yet, eventually, I tell you what's going to happen. They're going to applaud. Many of them that were laughing are then going to applaud.
Yeah.
You'll make, and I think that's what Jesus, you know, he was walked straight through Samaria and met the Samaritan woman.
Right.
You know, at the well, and you know, it was on purpose.
And they would have said, never go there. You'll
do
never
not
reach them.
go
You'll
there.
never
It's a
reach
waste
anybody.
of time.
Right.
You know, I just think we lose the, if we're not careful, I would say you lose the possibility and the chance of reaching people when you divert to other things.
I agree.
And that's where social media, again, you've now offended so many people. They're not listening to you about Christ because they've written you off because of your opinions on
As a matter
other
of fact,
things.
they'll associate your political
With
opinions
Christ.
to Christianity,
Right, and exactly.
as many have done,
If
which
you're a
brings
Christian-
persecution on the church.
Correct. Because you're foolishness.
Right.
And that's where social media goes awry. But it's so easy to write that stuff. And you know, you mentioned it a while back. Do a study of your posts. What are your posts mostly about?
Yeah.
Probably not the gospel.
There is an app. I was telling Pastor Chris about this. I have to find it again, see if we can post it. There is an app. It was several years ago. It was like one of those things, you know, which potato are you most like, and you type in the answers. But you allow it to look at your social media. It'll go back for the year and evaluate the words in your social media posts, and it does a little collage of like what's your word. So it takes the word that you most used and it puts it in the middle. So I saw people do. Some of you guys may remember this. It was pretty popular like 4 or 5 years ago, and you know people would have like their wife's name in the middle,
Right.
and then all this stuff, or like work sucks will be the first
Yeah.
thing in the middle, or whatever. And all
Yeah.
stuff. And mine had things in there, and but it was very. I was grateful what mine said that time. Like, I think I didn't do this 3 years ago, but it's convicting. It's
Yeah.
convicting, and out of
We
the
don't
abundance
realize
of your
it
heart,
day
your
by day.
out of the abundance of your heart, your social media speaks. You know, so
Yeah.
we should probably get the Cindy's
Yeah,
question.
go ahead. Especially Cindy's.
Yeah, everyone left after that.
I think
rant
so.
anyway.
We've offended
So
everybody.
what's they're like, he's on social media ranting. Isn't this the same
Exactly.
thing
Is
he's
this
saying
a
not to do?
hypocrite?
So, what's the best way of fighting fear, worry, anxiety when it crowds our thoughts, even when we know the scriptures speak to those things? Should I pray more, study the word more? So, yes. Ask your husband at home.
Yeah,
No.
I think all that. I think, you know, he is at peace whose mind is stayed on thee. You know, I think that's a powerful verse there, because our minds tend to wander if we're not honest. Right? You know, our minds, for a moment, we may be stayed on the Lord and His promises and all that, but then we tend to drift, and we got to get it back. And so I think that's the discipline. You know, we're not, you know, in that area of fear, which we're still battling the sin nature, if you will, that sin, or that indwelling sin, maybe, or remaining sin, however you want to say it. Because as a believer, I wouldn't say we have sin nature; we have a new nature.
Right.
But you know, I think the discipline for all of us is keeping our mind fixed on the promises of the Lord. You know, and He is at perfect peace whose mind is fixed or stayed on Thee. That's the discipline. It's not. When I thought about you this morning, and now taking every thought captive. 2 Corinthians 10:5 to the obedience of Christ. There's a discipline there. Something comes into my mind. Okay, is that in line with the character of God, with the promises of God, with the Word of God, or is that out of line? If it's out of line, I throw it away.
Right.
And as odd as that sounds, it is a discipline that we have to cultivate because that, again, Romans 12, renewing of the mind. You know, these battles are in the mind.
But that faith has to be tested.
Yeah.
So to her question, what may be left out here, but I have some context to
you
this
have
question.
context, yeah.
So it's one thing to say, I believe these truths, and even to believe them. But when it comes to anxiety, sometimes we're waiting for the anxieties to go away. I could sit here and say, I really trusted God at one time that He would take care of me no matter what, financially.
Right.
But then the finances went away.
Right.
And then I had to step out in faith when that happened. And now that was a trial He brought to my doorstep to do that, to cause me to have that faith. But when did the faith grow? The faith grew in twofold. One, through believing the truth of the Scripture.
Yeah.
And two, through experiencing the trial.
Sure.
So if anxiety is your issue, and you're trusting the Lord in these things, but the anxiety isn't going away, I would say step out now in faith.
Right.
In anxiety, but
even
trusting
in anxiety.
you work.
Right.
And you almost, in a sense, fall upon the mercies of the Lord.
Correct.
And then as he carries you, that faith becomes stronger.
Correct. Yeah, undoubtedly. You can't just wait until they go away. Yeah, you have
It's
to
not.
act.
It's only going to go worse
away.
because you're not actually proving your faith.
Yeah, and there's never going to be that that utopian place where we're not battling with any of that.
Right.
But I do think we step out, fixing when we can fix our mind on truth, right? That's what I was getting at. Is you still have to fix your mind on that truth.
Yes.
And know that no matter what, these are true.
Right.
Even if this falls apart right now, these are still true.
Right.
And me acting out in obedience and faith may Satan try to increase my anxiety or whatever, but you still have to keep your mind fixed on those truths. I would argue.
I think so, and
it doesn't mean you don't act. It doesn't mean you get to a spot where you don't battle that anymore.
We're so blessed to have
It's
diaries and journals of saints that have gone through
Right.
this. I would say, reading stuff from guys like David Brainerd, and men who have struggled with anxiety and depression and different things like that. Martin Lloyd-Jones has stuff on spiritual depression. It's very helpful. The Bruised Reed is a great book for that. To have real practical application of some of these scriptures from people who have lived through it before as you step out in faith is
Right.
also helpful. So we have another question. A couple coming in. Why do you guys wait till the last 5 minutes to ask all the questions?
Exactly.
You know why? It's because we started ranting. I started ranting. They're like, shut them up, ask a good question.
Or it prompts questions. But
Maybe.
I think the conversation's been good. I think it's true. That's the thing. I mean, you want to see the relevance. The Bible is relevant to our times. It is alive. God is still speaking today. It's not as if he just put some stuff down on paper and then closed the book.
So
He is
miraculous that
still
word can do that.
speaking. It is in the sense of not new revelation. I don't take that and mean that. What I mean by that is Hebrews 4. God's word is alive and active. It's not stale truth that expired
Right.
2 weeks ago. It's funny how the same things that you see in The Chosen is the same things we're dealing with today.
Right.
We saw an old episode of The West Wing the other night, and the same. It was years. How long ago? 20 years ago. They're battling. The episode was exactly what we're battling today.
That's because they still haven't fixed it.
They won't. They won't. Politics is not going to fix it.
No.
The
We are
gospel
not looking for a
The
political
gospel will.
solution.
The gospel will,
Yeah.
and not necessarily fix it, but
By all means, vote for Christian leaders.
it'll allow us to walk through it
Right.
and be effective. What's the question?
So Debbie's question is, Tharp said, have we restarted the process for looking for a worship leader?
Yes.
Sorry if you already said it. So Debbie, Pastor Chris has graciously volunteered to lead us in worship every single week. He's got
Correct.
amazing kazoo
Yeah, exactly.
skills.
Oh, I'm gonna do dual. I'm trying to.
We're gonna sing the one hymn,
exactly.
and it's always gonna 3 times.
Who can satisfy?
Yeah.
No. Yes, we have, and we've refined the process, and we're calling some like-minded churches, large churches. Tom has already done that, and has some good leads.
Yeah. Talk to them today too.
Yeah, and
It's
so
good.
so we have, and hopefully we'll.
So the job description is posted back up again, and I haven't shared that link. I'll put that up on the social media here in the next day or two. But we have an Indeed ad. So if you know someone who's looking, we have the ad is active again. People can apply there, and we are reaching out to churches to get some more help from some people because we're a unique church, and there's a unique candidate out there that but it's sometimes hard to make that marriage happen. So we've got other matchmakers out there,
And there's some large churches that are developing leaders and know leaders and are connected, and so I think Clay Brown mentioned it, and I think it's a great idea just to tap in to call some of these First Baptist Jacksonville's, Atlanta's, Capitol Hill Baptist Church, other churches, and say, hey, you guys know of anybody? We need a worship leader. You got anybody in the pipe? You got anybody that's ready to have that opportunity to lead, and who would be ready for our culture and nature and all that? And so we're shaking all those trees.
Yep.
Hopefully it'll produce.
Because we're
the
very
right guy.
specifically looking for a mature believer who is musically talented and is doctrinally sound.
Yeah.
And that's hard to find.
And then the problem is, we're not willing to settle for just somebody who is
Can play the
gifted
banjo.
musically or looks apart or is charismatic in their personality, but theologically is void.
Or their walk is just not mature.
Yeah, I mean, we need to. There's more to worship than just playing the right notes.
Yeah.
And I thought Tom did a great job. You know, Sunday would be a picture of kind of what we're
Maybe not on the
looking
playing the right notes.
for, but and Clay does it as well. I'm just saying from Sunday. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's a picture of what we're looking for, theologically rich. Hopefully, I try to do that in the sermon, and yet we want that to be the same in our worship through music as well. Theologically rich and bringing in the scriptures and all that. So,
All right, next
so we
question.
have started.
Lee's back again.
Lee,
Lee, just so you know, this is your first time asking questions. You're only supposed to ask one.
yeah, for every time you've appeared, you get one question. So your second time, you can ask 2 questions the same episode.
So Lee asked, with the pause in having assembly together as a body of believers, do you feel there will be a challenge to re-engage the gathering together as believers to be in obedience to Hebrew 10? How do you encourage believers to see the value in the gathering? So
I'm going to assume your question, Lee, is do you think people will be used to watching online and not feel like they need to come anymore?
yeah,
Is
because
that the
Hebrews 10,
essence
you
of
know,
what he?
do not neglect gathering together
Was that
as
Hebrews?
some.
Yeah,
Is that Hebrews 10?
10:25. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I think when as we get back together, you know, hopefully through the deacons' phone calls and whatnot, but then also just, you know, there's going to be an element of looking around and making phone calls and touching base and, hey, do you see somebody? Do you not see somebody?
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a community-wide endeavor to, once we start back, hey, you got him, you got them, where are they?
we should be doing that now.
And we should be doing that now.
Yeah.
And even as we start back, and hopefully through the deacons' phone calls and interacting amongst each other, you know, hopefully that is happening.
Well, we're already seeing it. You guys can see right now. We've had a decrease of people taking part in these live Q&As and people, you know, watching sermons and things like that. And I did some research on that, and most of the feedback I got was, well, we are watching. We're just not watching live. So the concern becomes, well, at 9:15 is when we gather.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is that going to be, as your schedules change to adapt to quarantine? Are you going to be able to come back? I think we will come back.
There'll be a lot of work to do. I think our
there's
people will
gonna be
come
work to
back.
do,
I mean,
though.
I think we've had a high number of people stay engaged through the sermons in various means. But yeah, we're going to need to, you know, do. I think it's a community endeavor.
Yes.
You know, I think the grow groups and the deacons, and just as you think of somebody, if you haven't talked to them in a while, and I think that's more powerful than just me doing it. I think it's more powerful when everybody does it. And so even now, Lee, I would encourage you, to continue calling people as they come to mind. Reach out to them and
Especially
encourage them.
Lee should do this because he's a likable
Well,
person.
he is a very likable person. He has a great personality, and the fact that he asked the question, it's on his mind, and I would expect that. I mean,
We'll send you a phone number list, Lee.
start
says-
with the A's.
He said, will they choose to stay home because it's easier? And, you know, to use a big word here, you know, I think what we're finding is that I think all churches would agree that our ecclesiology, which is our beliefs about what the church is, that's the big word, right? Ecclesiology, our doctrine of the church, what we believe the church is supposed to be, is challenged here.
Absolutely.
Because people will say, well, what does it matter?
What does
I
it
worshiped
matter?
at home.
And I sent you my offering or whatever.
Right. But the Bible is very clear
Absolutely.
about this.
And because you don't get the encouragement.
Right.
You don't get to look around and see fellow brothers and sisters, and there's something, and that is
Well, the church is God's plan.
Absolutely, and that's where we miss it, the encouragement of the saints, and knowing that we're not alone. And they may do that for a while until they need something, right? Until they go through something, and then there's nobody there. But I think it's going to be all of us looking around, and if we don't see somebody or haven't talked to somebody, just call them. I've done that, you know, periodically each week. I'll call a few people. Hey, if the Lord brings in my mind, I'll call them and touch base with them if I haven't seen them or communicated, or if I don't know, like, oh, I know Lee talked to that person I heard, or I know this person talked. Okay, but somebody who I don't, I'll reach out to them.
Yeah, and it's hard because right now there's legitimate concerns about gatherings.
Yeah, I think
So-
right now there's legitimate. It's hard to say. The longer this goes on, I think the more apt someone is to tend to that pattern.
But I think it's a good question because
Great
it does
question.
bring up,
We need to be mindful
should
of
we
it.
be gathering
We need-
together? I mean,
Yeah.
yes, obviously, yes.
And I would tell people to not wait. I would start reaching out to people now.
Yeah. But we can be gathering, to your point, we can be gathering without even being together. We can be calling one another. We can be doing whatever we should be doing.
There's ways.
Good. All right. Any last minute questions? We are at 8:02. Get them in. Hopefully we have answered these to your satisfaction. Don't think I missed any. Barbara came on, but we got no Barbara question this week.
What?
After spending a whole week with you, she's
Her
asked
day
you.
was in. Yeah, I've
She's
answered
asked
all
you
her
everything.
questions last week. I probably created so many other questions that she just doesn't even know where to start from spending a week with me. Her dog was at the vet all day, so she's probably reeling from that. Her question is, do dogs go to heaven? No. No.
We've been asked that before on this live.
Yeah.
We have a vault now of these answers.
We're gonna go send you to episode 3, minute 14.
So maybe we can end on this. I think Lee brings up a really good point that as we gather together, I think we have an awesome opportunity before us as a church to extend grace and love, to lay aside politics and to run to the gospel and to see what we have in common, which is so much greater, which is Christ. To share the union of the grace of life is such an awesome opportunity. I think we should just relish in that as we come together and not see the brother or the sister who may have offended, but to see that the grace of life is shared between us, that Christ saw fit to redeem me, therefore I have nothing but forgiveness. And to use Lee's word, to display that in hospitality.
And I think one of the ways that we might display that, Lee, is, and it's going to be needed, is simply forgiving. As we get back together, it could be something that was posted. It could be that someone fell through the cracks and wasn't communicated with as much as we. I mean, one of the things that we learned as elders is just that, really needing to buttress up our data bank and making sure all the information is correct. And I think there's going to be a lot of points at which we can display the gospel, and one of them is going to be forgiveness.
Amen.
And again, Matthew 18, looking at my own forgiveness and how I'm the debtor who had the insurmountable debt. Why should I not forgive the person who has the small debt? So I think there's going to be a lot of ways that we're going to need to work to, and that's all I'm getting at when we get back together. I think there's going to be work that needs to be done, because you let a land kind of sit dormant for a little while, weeds and thistles and all these things pop up, and then you got to go till the land again, and it's there, the nutrients are there, underneath that rough layer, it's there, it just needs to be tilled up, and I think that's where, and just in God's sovereignty, it's interesting, we're in Romans 11.
Yeah.
Just a reminder there of being grafted into the vine and the faithfulness of God and not to become arrogant to one another and proud and all that's there in chapter 11. I began studying that even while I was at the beach. I just started studying it again, and it's just rich stuff there in just the first. You could do 3 or 4 sermons just in the first 6 verses.
And we probably
we might.
Yeah.
Don't dare me.
So,
Don't dare me.
Challenge accepted. And I think, and maybe this is a prophetic word, but between now and November, I think that I know for me, and I think all of us should guard against gossip.
Absolutely, everything.
Guard against gossip right now.
Yeah.
I just think that we have to be aware the enemy is going to use this upcoming election against the church in every way
and
possible.
guard against becoming divided over political parties
Right.
and positions within those parties, whether it's economics, there's just a plethora of things that Satan would love to get us divided over and get our attention off the gospel.
Yeah.
Because those things aren't going to be solved today.
Yeah.
They're always going to be. They always have been there, and they always are going to be there. And even within the church, we're very divided over those. Unfortunately, for better.
I have found politics to be a great way to start an evangelistic conversation. When someone comes up to me and says they're voting a certain way or asks what my opinion is on a particular issue, undoubtedly there's an opportunity there to share why I feel what my worldview is.
Yeah.
And if my worldview is and should be like 99.999% Christian and not 100% Christian, if that's what's informing my worldview, then the opportunity there is not to say I vote this way because I'm Christian.
Right.
That's not what I'm saying. But instead to say, You know, I'm a born again believer in Jesus Christ. My worldview is not Republican or Democrat, but my worldview is Christian.
It's Bible.
And that's had the biggest impact on my life. So there are some political issues which are clearer for me, and there are some that aren't. But this is what I know.
Right, yeah.
What I know is the Bible is true.
Yeah.
That nothing we do on earth in this earthly kingdom is going to solve the ultimate issue.
Correct.
The ultimate issue for me isn't this issue or that issue, it's sin.
Correct.
And the ultimate redeemer for me is Christ.
Right.
And
sin
we can
is the
segue-
root of all of
Right.
the division.
So we can segue to the solution, because if someone comes asking a political opinion, they're saying, how do you feel to best solve this?
Correct.
How can I give them any other answer but Christ?
Right, yeah.
And I'm not saying, a theocracy here.
Well, and ultimately it may not be solved on this side of eternity.
Right. But I think that that's something to meditate on is, are we prepared with those answers to give a defense?
To give a defense, yeah, of why you feel that way.
Just like at Christmas time, it's a great way an easy time to talk about the birth of Christ. I feel like at election time, it's a great time to talk
Right,
about.
good word.
Talk about that.
Talk about this stuff.
And if you have any questions on exactly how to do that, Pastor Chris is always available for those phone calls.
Email the elders
Yeah. Elders
at churchatodessa.org.
Yes. Awesome. So hopefully it's been good. And if not, we apologize. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.
They got their money's worth. They got their money's worth.
Hopefully we'll see many more of you come Sunday
Yeah.
in air conditioning.
Sunday 9:15. Get there early. It's going to take a little bit to get people seated to get there early.
Clay's leading worship. You don't have to worry about
Tom
that.
did a great job. He's being humble. He did a great job.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next
See ya.
week.
Good job. Dad.
Hold on. We're still live.